You're good to go.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. This is the meeting of the Policy Review Committee, better known as PRC, for Thursday, December 10th, 2020. And we will start with the roll call, please.
Chair Brown,
Here.
Board Member Cole, Dr. Pierce,
Present.
Ms. Beasley,
Present.
Ms. Klein,
Present.
Ms. Ellingson. You're unfortunately still muted.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hey, I'm here.
Excellent. Mr. Holt and Ms. White,
Here.
you have a quorum?
Thank you. Thank you. We've got a pretty short agenda today. Maybe we'll get done early like we did the last meeting. We've got three policies with modifications recommended to review. And we've got the minutes from the last meeting to adopt and approve. Do we have a motion to
I
approve? the
motion
minutes?
to approve our meeting minutes from our last meeting.
I actually have one correction. That's okay.
Sure.
There's it says Singer Gender Schools rather than single. If we
That
could
was-
just make that one correction, and then I
I
would
will-
second with. Yeah.
If everybody is okay with making that that amendment, then we've got and actually there's two amendments. There's 2 minutes there. There's the minutes from the October and the November meeting. So I'm guessing that when you move the minutes, Dr. Pierce, you're moving both sets of minutes under that particular heading.
Yes, I am moving to approve both minute meetings with the friendly amendment.
And we had a second from Ms. Ellingson.
Very good. Questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, thank you.
Chair
Let's
Brown,
see.
if I may indulge the committee a moment, we thought we were ready to go with policy 6424. However, my understanding in a call from the treasurer's office this morning, and the treasurer is on our call today, on our meeting today, they are not quite ready to move away the procurement card at this point in time. So we would like to ask that be removed from the agenda without any objection.
Removed without objection.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if it so pleases the chair, if we can, because I think the first, it's a one sentence policy under 6423. If you'd be okay to start with that policy. And if that's fine, then in short, the district doesn't make use of district issued credit cards. We're supposed to have a policy, regarding credit cards. I think in order to make and I'm sure our friend from IA, the internal audit would probably agree with this. So as to make sure that we're we're in compliance with everything, we'll go ahead and have a policy that simply states that we're not authorizing a district credit card. That way we are not only in compliance, but also as auditors come to make sure that we have policies in place, they see that even though we don't make use of the credit cards, we have a policy related to the fact that we don't make use of the credit cards. So.
So I had a couple of questions for this one, Dr. Roush. This
Certainly.
is a policy that we are in fact creating, not Neola.
Yes, we are. Well, we are creating this because in short, they have a credit card policy. They have a template for a credit card policy, but again, we don't make use of credit cards. And as I said, the treasurer's the treasurer's office does not wish to utilize credit cards. And I think there's a number of control issues that go along with that. I'm sure he could probably speak to more coherently than I.
Then I guess my second question is, we will put the date of adoption at the bottom. Right now, I don't see a holder for that date. Will that date be put on? Once we
Yes,
adopt
Neola
it?
will add that once the policy is adopted.
Okay. And then I guess this question would be for our treasurer, just because we are, this meeting is public and made available to the public. If we could just provide a high-level executive overview or summary as to why we do not use credit cards, I think it would be beneficial for our community to understand that.
Certainly, very high level. First and foremost, our current purchasing mechanisms and procedures satisfy our purchasing needs. And usually credit cards are some form of enhancement or facilitator to purchases, but that's not been deemed necessary within our framework. Secondly, controls and reconciliation, if you will, around the use of credit cards they are difficult, and the headline risk of credit card usage outweighs its benefit to us. If members of the committee, I would assume that members of the committee have heard in the past about some of the issues with even with a policy, individuals who held a credit card issued by a governmental entity misused them, and that became a real problem. So since we don't need it because we have other purchasing procedures that satisfy our needs, no sense opening up this Pandora's box.
Thank you so much, Treasurer Borak. We appreciate it. Those are my questions.
Anybody else have questions or suggestions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve this policy change?
I motion that we approve the adoption of policy 6423 for our district.
Second.
Second.
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? This policy 6423 is passed.
And I would like to note that Board Member Cole joined us at 8:43.
Welcome, Michael.
The next policy for consideration, and the final one for this morning, is 6144 investments. This is a policy change recommended by Neola due to a statutory change through House Bill 251 of the 132nd General Assembly, having to do with bonds and other obligations maturing within 10 years. That was added to the statute. They've suggested then that it be added here to the investment policy, which largely mirrors 135.14. With that, I will turn it over to the treasurer to add some additional comment.
Okay, thank you. Investment policies are an interesting topic. My experience on the other side of the table as a registered investment advisor working in the public sector, I've written these policies, and one of the things that we have always run into, and I think we run into in this particular case as well, is that generally speaking, well, I shouldn't say generally speaking, investments in the public sector are governed by very specific sections of Ohio law. In this particular case, 135.14 and following sequences apply to public entities other than counties. And so we are governed by 135.14. That's what governs what we do. And I'm going to say not board policy. It's the Ohio law that governs what we do. Board policy in this particular case cannot be more, what's the opposite of restrictive? I can't come up with the word.
Permissive.
Permissive, thank you. It cannot be more permissive because Ohio law places these restrictions on there. And what you find when you attempt, as Dr. Rouse said, to mirror Ohio Revised Code in your policy, a couple of things can and do and have happened here with Columbus. One, the law changes. And in order to be in compliance with the law, you then have to turn around and change your policy so you comply with both policy and law. I would argue that's somewhat unnecessary, and I think I have a proposed amendment that we can talk about. Secondarily, it's Mr. Sinskowski from IA is here. He did an audit and went through and pretty much line by line compared our policy to the revised code and gave us a list of suggestions for items in the code that weren't referenced in our policy. He also has some other suggestions of a one part of our policy that is not applicable, that should be removed, and then a whole nother set of best practice suggestions to add into the policy. I've had the opportunity to review two parts of that, those two parts pertaining to the Ohio Revised Code and our policy. I have not yet, and I'm not prepared today to suggest adding things around some of his suggestions on best practices. The long and the short of it is, I'm of a mind to discuss, and then I recommend that we consider a more simple policy that says something to the effect of Board of Education authorizes the treasurer to make investments of available monies from funds of the district in securities authorized under section 135.14 at sequence as amended from time to time, and simply refer the reader of the policy to the Ohio Revised Code. I haven't yet heard a convincing argument for me personally to attempt to regurgitate the code in your policy when what you want to do is stay up to date with policy. So I think, why don't we just say that? And then the minute the law changes either to more permissive or more restrictive, it automatically is in effect without having to, not that I don't like coming to PRC, but we don't have to go through that step. Those are my thoughts. I have the revised code and our policy on my screen side by side if you wanted to see it, but this layout of this policy is similar but not identical to, and there are pieces and parts that get mentioned differently in the policy than how they are in Ohio law. So if you are evaluating our policy against Ohio law, you can't line it up perfectly. You really have to search through it to find the pieces and parts. Kevin did that, Mr. Sanskowski did that, and that's where his recommendations came from. So those are my thoughts. If we don't want to do a very simple policy, then I think I would be tempted to essentially do a cut and paste on 135.14 and just cut and paste it right into your policy. And so that both the form and the substance of policy and law matches up perfectly.
So Treasurer Borak, what I hear you saying is while this policy is extensive, it does not cover all bases of the new revised code or the new revised law. And you would prefer that we use that we make more brief language that will in fact cover the entire law and future changes if those are made through the brevity of a new proposed policy.
That is correct.
Do you have particular language? I heard you at a point say you weren't ready today with that language. Do you have a particular? Oh, Dr. Roush put it there.
Dr. Roush and I spoke this morning, and he said to me, I think I've got your one line recommended amendment. And
It went away. I can't see it anymore.
Got a question. Are there any staff members or administrators or anybody else who looks to the policy currently for guidance that wouldn't necessarily be looking to the revised code or not feel comfortable navigating the statute? Because, part of the policy too is just having literally the policies all in one place without the need to go outside of it in order to know what the district's obligations and practices are supposed to be. But this one seems like a more technical, higher level policy that perhaps the folks that implement this are already aware and comfortable of the revised code.
There is one other staff member, the controller, and he and I are both well-versed in the law, quite frankly, rather than the policy. And when we consider actions within our investment activity, to be frank, we rely on the law, not so much this policy, except to the extent that we are notified of changes in the law and realize they aren't in the policy. Although we don't buy 10-year maturity securities at this point in time, we're aware that it changed, not necessarily in a rush to put that in. But I've been around long enough to have seen this law change substantially. And, entities that have regurgitated law into their policy have had to wait to take advantage of some of the more permissive aspects of the law until their policy caught up. And I get your point. I think that's a very valid point of kind of a one-stop shop to look for things, but you are correct. There's really only two of us that this makes a difference to in the district. And again, we're very well versed in the law. We do engage the services of two RIAs, SEC registered investment advisors, and they are charged with the fiduciary responsibility to ensure that our investment practices follow our policy and law. And so it makes that coordination simpler, if you will, if it's a brief policy rather than, hey, we read your policy, we've looked at the law, they don't align, we can't do these things, you need to make changes, that kind of thing. That will eliminate that eventuality. But yeah, just two of us.
If I may ask one other question, are there any, apart from as you mentioned, this sets the floor and not the ceiling for restrictions on how the board and the district manage investments, are there any other substantive policies that are not covered by this that would be helpful for investments? And there I'm wondering about, for instance, restrictions on fees that fund managers could charge, policies regarding transparency about types of investments. PERS and STIRS have gotten in trouble for, hiring hedge funds and other investors that are extremely opaque about what their actual returns are and charge extremely high fees, which of course reduces the amount of funds that are available to the public entity.
I think Mr. Sanskowski has made some recommendations about best practices in reference to the operation of the investment activity, which we're not prepared to enter into today. I want to review that a little bit further, as well as some references to our relationship with RIAs. Our relationship with the investment managers, if you will, they're really investment advisors, not managers. And our funds are much more restrictive than SCRS, PRS, and STRS. So we're not getting involved in those high fee types of mechanisms. Ours is really, really plain vanilla. And on the risk reward continuum, it's really kind of interesting because as you talk to those of us under the auspices of 135.14, we talk about risk, but it's kind of funny. If risk were categorized on a scale of 1 to 10, we're operating in the risk frame of like 1 to 1.2. And so our management of risk, you know what happens when you take a graph and you have to blow the scale up to show the differences in the lines, you know? You really have to blow that up, because the difference in risk between a govie and an agency, a U.S. Treasury security and a Fannie is minimal compared to, say, a government agency security and equities. By the way, equities are a constitutional prohibition for public entities. So you don't have to say we can't play in the stock market. That's a constitutional issue, which really isn't reiterated in any policy that I've ever seen. But point well taken. I think we'll address some of that when we get to Mr. Sanskowski's recommendations on best practices.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear about that more conservative approach, which seems appropriate for this kind of, at least in my opinion, for this kind of government entity.
Yeah, and I think, again, I keep, you know, Kevin, if I misspeak for Kevin, I'm sure he'll chime in. But one of the things I think that Kevin suggests is we talk about our objectives, and they are generically for any public entity governed by 135.14, as well as counties, is that, you know, we look at, return and liquidity and risk, and not in those orders. It's first we look at liquidity and then risk and then return. So there's a saying in our business that it's not the return on principal, it's the return of principal that we're concerned. And these are generally buy and hold portfolios. It is a rare time when we might, quote unquote, trade the account. We don't do that. In fact, in the revised code, it says that we may not purchase a security unless we reasonably expect to hold it to maturity. And that is in reference to some issues that have happened in the past. So I think I will get to much of your point when we review those best practices, and then it would be a one-line policy with more of those types of practice guidelines, as opposed to this statutory kind of a recipe of what you can and cannot purchase in terms of type of security. This code does not, except to the extent that they limit your percentage of holdings in BAs and bankers acceptances and commercial paper. They really don't speak to diversification. And I think that's some of the things that I think Mr. Sanskowski would like to see as a best practice in here when we speak to diversification. And so we will have a future conversation about that and how restrictive or permissive we want to be in that realm. I have my own opinions because of where we operate on the risk continuum, whether or not diversification is as important here as it would be if you were a PERS or a SERS or a private investor. You know what I mean? So that's a future discussion, but point well taken. And I know Board Member Brown thought that this would be a short meeting, but I failed to remind him that I'm here and I could turn any 15-minute meeting into an hour-long meeting. So
I would like to, the proposed language, can we change from time to time to periodically? And then we do have, I think Board Member Cole is on, and he is the chair of FAC. And I just wanted to know if he had any feedback, recommendations, or comments related to this particular policy and our proposed language.
Thank you.
You got a second?
Very quick. Just start
Can you hear me?
Okay, just very quickly. The treasurer was asking about being able to do more ad hoc Zoom calls.
Yeah, I think somebody's on the,
beta.
somebody needs to mute their phone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I was like, that's not me. Either way, thank you so much for leaning on me to weigh in. I do know that over time in the well 7 years now that well, excuse me, not 7, but probably about 5 or 6 years that Mr. Bohoric and I have been working together, he has instilled those proper controls and exercised best practices with regards to this particular policy. But again, if there are some additional guardrails that we need to look at, including in the policy so that it is very clear, because where Stan, and I'm always very vehement about this, where Stan or any other person follows something integritiously, that is awesome, and that is always good. But we're not designing policy around a person. We are designing it around controls and systems as guardrails for a position. So, Mr. Bohoric, Mr. Treasurer, if there's any additional conversation that we can have on our end with Mr. Gooding to this effect, then let's figure that out and then move forward from there. And we can pass this through not only just this committee, this august body, but we can also pass it through FAC if necessary as well. But thank you for that. I hope I answered the question.
Well, I don't think it wasn't really a question. It was just we wanted your insights and expertise, being the chair of FAC, on approaching this particular amended language.
Nope, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Now, I missed a chunk of the discussion when I got kicked off, but am I correct that where we are now is what's shown on the screen, and that is to strike everything and add the first sentence only as the policy? I like that approach. The only thing that I would like to see if we do this is to provide a link to the code section so that somebody who's looking this up, comes across this, has a really easy way to get to the proper section of the code. I know that's not something we've done in our policy manual, but I suspect there is the ability to do that. And if we could provide links wherever we reference the law or any outside resource, that'd probably be a very good practice.
Chair Brown, I also think it's important that the record note we have a commitment on the part of our treasurer, Mr. Borak, as well as the chair, board member Cole, chair of FAC, to continue to monitor this with the goal of developing administrative guidelines that are in alignment with the recommendations from the Internal Auditor's Office. And Treasurer Borak and Board Member Cole, please feel free to correct me if I am misunderstanding or misinterpreting.
Oh, no, you have not. What we'll do is work with Mr. Bohoric. We'll work with Mr. Bohoric to ensure that we put the best practices in this policy that are in alignment with statute or Ohio Revised Code, and also that are proactive to Ms. White's concern, that are proactive in addressing certain issues in this policy. So we'll work to that effect.
And I will say that I don't believe you've seen the internal audit report. I happen to be looking at a section of it that Mr. Sanskowski has shared with us in preparation for this meeting. But I think there's some of the best practices that may in fact actually result in maybe a separate policy. I'm not a policy writer per se, but for instance, there's a recommendation about guidelines for identifying, selecting, and evaluating investment advisors. That might be, I don't know whether it'd be a separate policy or not, but some of these can be some pretty lengthy sections when it gets down to some of those guidelines. And we'll look to, outside recommendations, professional associations, and not have to really reinvent the wheel probably on some of that.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much, Treasurer Borick and Board Member Coe.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
That all sounds good to me. Are we ready to proceed with this? Do we have a motion for approval?
Motion to approve. Will this be an amended policy?
Correct.
Yes.
Motion to approve amended policy and 6144 on investments.
I second.
All in favor? Say aye.
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 Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, this policy 6144 has been passed and will be recommended to the board for approval. And
That is all we have on the agenda today, sir.
Very good. And unless anybody on the committee feels otherwise, probably as we go, rather than trying to do it all at once, I'd like to see links so that people can find anything that we refer to. Anybody feel differently?
Do we have the right code section there? Because I see references to 135.03 further down. So is 1.4 just a subsection of the code as we have in the title?
I believe that the investment policy makes reference to a couple different sections, but I think that the treasurer is referencing in particular the policy or the statute he uses to make
Okay.
decisions is 135.14. But Mr. Bohoric, is that correct?
135.03 has to do with the institutions that are eligible as public depositories, which is a completely separate activity.
Okay.
And the number of the code section should be preceded by RC.
My apologies, a scrivener's error.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all for getting on and joining us and for such a quick and productive meeting. Plan for this coming year will include continuing meetings on the current schedule going forward, unless anybody feels strongly otherwise, that it seemed to work and we should continue. Any thoughts? Hearing none. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Board Chair Brown, before we adjourn, can I just want to tell everybody happy holidays. It's been quite a pleasure to serve with you all on this year. 2020 has been quite a year. We look forward to 2021 being spectacular in very different ways. But please continue to be safe and have a very happy holiday.
And Mr. Chair, I don't know if Ms. Beasley had a comment or was she motioning?
I was motioning. But I do have a comment. I've learned a lot this year as the new member of the board. And the discussion has been very informative, and I've learned a lot, and I'm glad I'm on the board this year.
Thank you. Thank you. And I too join in the message to stay safe and healthy. Do all the practices that have been recommended, consistently recommended. Wash hands, distance, and wear a mask. And it's just incredibly important. The numbers continue to rise. We have not yet seen the peak. We have not yet seen the impact of Thanksgiving Day. That's just now beginning to show up. And I anticipate that we're going to continue at this high rate for well into the new year. I don't think the virus is paying much attention to the calendar. So we just need to get more people to comply with those recommendations. And with that, thank you all.
You don't have a second to adjourn yet.
Oh,
I'll
that's
second.
Dr.
I'll
Pierce,
second.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
roll call, please.
Chair Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Ms. Beasley,
Yes.
Ms. Klein,
Yes.
Ms. Ellingson,
Yes.
Ms. White.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Awesome. Thank you all, and enjoy your holidays.
Thank you.
Bye.
Be blessed,
Thank you,
everybody.